Hello everyone, I am Baptiste Leproux, the product lead of Nuxt Studio, and today I'm going to show you the power of Nuxt Content paired with Nuxt Studio. Nuxt Content is a Nuxt module that lets Nuxt developers integrate Markdown directly into their Nuxt application. You can think of it as a flexible database from where you can store Markdown file and directly query them using a Query Builder API. There are lots of great features with the content module, mainly concerning the Markdown syntax. For example, you can integrate metadata directly into your Markdown file and integrate also view components directly into the syntax. But what if I want to edit this content with a visual, easy, and intuitive interface? This is where Nuxt Studio comes in. From the Nuxt Studio interface, you can directly browse your content folders and your Markdown file. You can preview your website, and you can select any file you want to update. Instead of editing directly the Markdown, we've built an editor, which is editing the Markdown for you under the hood. So here, for example, I'm editing the exact same file I was showing you on VS Code. I can directly edit the settings of my file, but I can also play with the content. I can play with view components, duplicate them, delete them, or update the slots inside it. I can browse my medias to integrate new files, new medias. And once I'm happy with my modification, I can review the change. I can see that under the hood, we are updating the Markdown for you. Once I'm happy with it, I can just publish it on GitHub. It will save my changes. And if I open my repository on GitHub, I can see that the synchronization should be done. Here is my modification. That's it. Nuxt Studio gives you the ability to edit your content with a really easy to use and intuitive interface. If you want to give it a try, just go on nuxt.studio and try editing your content with the platform.
Transform your content creation with CK Editor 5, built for developers, loved by content creators. Integrate CK Editor seamlessly into any web application. Enjoy CK Editor Builder with complete flexibility with over 100 plugins, custom toolbar configurations, and ease of build. Work smarter with mentions and both asynchronous and real-time collaboration features like comments, track changes, and more. Create faster together. Completely customizable with powerful APIs, CK Editor adapts to your needs, whether you're building a simple blog or a complex content platform. Experience the power of CK Editor for your application with a free trial. Start building better content today with a rich text editor that's fast, flexible, and fully customizable.
Welcome back from break, beautiful humans. Thank you for all the connections. I am stoked about that. Up next, we have Alex Lichter. Welcome him to the stage. Alex is a web engineering consultant and key member of the Nuxt team. Today, he'll show us how to unleash the full stack beast with Nuxt, Nitro, and H3. This session is bound to provide some great insights. Welcome to the stage, Alex.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome from Amsterdam, Netherlands, right here. Nice that you all join throughout the world, wherever you are now, night or day. It's a lovely talk. Yeah, so let's get started. Okay, we start with, well, a thing that we all enjoy and love, right? Nuxt.js. Nuxt.js. Okay, you know what? That's enough ASMR. It's fine. Let's get it going, right? So we're all into that, definitely. But there's so much more beyond Nuxt itself, right? There is this wonderful yellow square with an un in it, un.js. And we hear a lot about un.js itself from Puya later on, right? Though there are a few more things that I want to tell you and do a few more things in practice. So let's talk about Nuxt, Nitro, and H3, yeah, in practice, in real world, so to say, and let's unleash the full stack beast here at Nuxt Nation 2024. So before we get started, I know there are some people out there that might not be aware that Nuxt has a server part of it, as in like, oh yeah, I use it as an SPA, that's lovely, that's great. You can build plain SPAs with Nuxt.js, and not like with any other meta framework. There are some that don't allow that, which sucks, because you don't need SSR all the time, right? But what if you have a new project and you say, hey, I want to build it the whole thing at once, having an API part, having communication, maybe some server-side rendering, and that's where, where Nuxt can shine as well. So let's have a look into that. Before, maybe a few words about me. For the people in chat, say I love ASMR. Maybe check that out later. Yeah, I'm Alex. I'm a web engineering consultant as Jen already said. Really appreciate it. I also, I'm a speaker, as you can witness here. I'm an instructor, so I give workshops, and also podcast host of the only English Vue.js podcast out there up and running called Deja Vu. Part of the Nuxt team, and I am on all social media. If you don't have Blue Sky yet, please get it. Follow me and all the other people out there. There's some really nice starter packs. Let's get all web dev over to Blue Sky. I have a website where I post every now and then. GitHub, of course, as well. And I think that's mainly that about me to know. So how about we get started with Nitro itself? And you might wonder, okay, yeah, Nitro, we heard it a lot here and there. What is that actually? And we can even take a look at that besides Nuxt.js, right? So Nitro is, first of all, it's based on a lot of other packages, right? We'll come to that in a second. But in the end, it's a server meta framework, in quotes. So very often, and I did it before as well, you compare Nitro to something like, I don't know, Fastify or Express or Connect or whatever. While Nitro does way more than that, right? It integrates an HTTP framework with a lot of other things, like packages like DB0, like Cross WS, and so on, right? So it's basically doing all these meta things for you. Like you can still connect with other things, of course, which means that you are ready for full stack development straight away with Nitro and a framework that is based on Nitro of your choice, right? Or standalone as well. And Nuxt server engine is Nitro, so that's great. It's also runtime agnostic, and it's responsible for the power that Nuxt, the whole deployment process of Nuxt has, right? Like say Cloudflare workers, yeah, not a problem. Your own VPS, not a big deal. Static site generation, like pre-rendering, easy peasy, and much more even. So a lot of power comes from the underlying Nitro package, right? So, and we have more features. Some are experimental, right? We can use the task API that's experimental. We can use DB0 for database connections. We have a lot of things available that are possible. And that you can use right now. And I mentioned it in the panel already. I just want to say it again. Experimental doesn't mean it might only work in 50% of the cases, or, oh, this is broken, but we want to try it out. Sometimes this also just means, hey, we want some feedback and we allow ourselves to make some API changes without creating a new major version. So if you pin your version, that's all good, right? You still probably should do that in a bigger project. Nevertheless, as I said before, it can be used standalone, and this is super, super important because lots of times it's like, oh yeah, Nitro is used for meta frameworks. That's cool, and it's true. Yeah, Nitro is used under hood for many meta frameworks out there. Even the Angular team is under discussion of like looking into Nitro, maybe using that for Angular itself, analog and so on, also powered by Nitro. Nevertheless, the main part is you can use it as you just, okay, I spin up an API that runs in Deno, Node.js, whichever runtime, but it's JavaScript or better TypeScript, and it works. So that's pretty sick. And I just mentioned H3, right? So H3 is, well, yeah, what is this actually? As I mentioned before, wrongly comparing Nitro to Express because they're not really on the same level. Like, let's say Nitro is up here doing all the goodies, right? And Express is down here giving like a base foundation. They're like not really comparable. What we can do now is we can compare H3 as like that plain HTTP web framework to Nitro. So I would just say, little bit cheeky maybe, Express but more modern, right? This is like the easiest claim, just like, okay, it is Express but more modern, which means it is an HTTP web framework. And it's a crucial part of Nitro itself, right? But you can also use H3 standalone. If you say, okay, I don't need all the things around it, all the deployment presets, this, that, all the integrations. You can say, hey, I want something minimal. H3 is a good start. And of course, it is also runtime agnostic. Otherwise, Nitro couldn't be, and so on, so on. So that's also an important point here. Plus, it's composable, right? Also, the same applies for Nitro, which means commonly in frameworks you have like this, and it was also asked sometimes like, oh, middleware. Sure, but how about you compose your request like we do with the composition API in Vue, but for the backend? We'll have a look at that in a bit. But it's very important. Of course, it's fast, right? It's blazing fast. It's also tree shakeable. And I brought a tiny thing here to show you, which is this Fastify/benchmarks repository. And they have some results in here, which shows, of course, the bare comparison. Then we have a few things. The H3 router are over here. We have things like Hono, Koa further down, Harpy, and of course Express. Because, well, it's been a while. Even the 5.0 version is not that fast. It's on the lower ends. Also, a word on these benchmarks, because it's always important. They benchmark very hypothetical scenarios, right? In your application, probably your like server framework is not the bottleneck usually, because you have still calls to database, you have API calls. These are usually the bottleneck. Same for the front end, by the way. So benchmarks are great. We always want to have the fastest framework so we can do something for speed. But first, these are very hypothetical scenarios, right? And second, we should actually benchmark the application itself. We probably also don't process like, I don't know, 10 million data entries per second or something. So yeah, always a bit tricky. Nevertheless, there is one more thing I want to show you from the Nuxt documentation actually. And because there's an important part about how Nuxt, Nitro, and H3, how they work together actually. And I think this is a really good option here to say like, okay, we have Nuxt, and a part of Nuxt, right, is Nitro, everything in the server folder. And part of Nitro is H3. But I think this is also not fully enough. So let's quickly switch to Excalidraw here and say like, okay, we have Nitro. Like, let's say this orange circle here is Nitro, right? And that's great. That's usually in the server folder. And then we have possibly, let's make that green because, well, it's Nuxt, right? And have this nicer circle over here, right? So we have that and say, okay, this is Nuxt plus like Vue plus like other libraries, right? Okay, perfect. And other libraries. And now what I did here on purpose is I didn't put these separately, right? We have here an intersection, and that's on purpose because there are scenarios where Nitro and Nuxt go hand in hand, because like what you can do is you can query an API route from Nitro, so select /API/test, and this API route here, this will never start the Nuxt application. Nitro will respond, right? Whatever you set up for your API test will say, okay, I'll give some data back, and we'll do this in a second. On the other hand, of course, when you boot up your Nuxt application, so you go like to, let's say, I don't know, there's almost like, let's say it goes from /A to /B, right? The client navigation, that's a good case. That's all Nuxt in Vue, right? There's no Nitro involved. Maybe we fetch an API part that then hits Nitro, of course. So we maybe do this inside here, but that's that. And now we might wonder, wait, what's happening here in between? Like there is still this intersection, and that intersection is, and some of you might already know that because it's a very, very common thing. This is actually Nuxt doing SSR. And with SSR, also a very important topic. I don't mean necessarily only having a server, right? But also static site generation pre-rendering. There also Nitro is involved, as just mentioned. So whether you say, okay, in build time, I render all my pages out, Nitro is involved, or whether you have a server running, you say, okay, I hard reload a page, then still SSR is happening. Even when you do SPA, then you say, okay, I don't want to do any server-side rendering. Nitro can still execute middleware if you have a server running, right? So there are parts where they go hand in hand. That's great. But of course, there are also parts where they do all their separate things. And now you might wonder, okay, but which things can they do? Like, okay, with Nuxt, we've seen so many amazing things. What about Nitro? So what can they do? And we just answered that by live coding, right? That's the only logical consequence to say like, okay, let's have a little sneak peek into things, because obviously we can't show all the things in 20 minutes. So let's see what we can do and get into live coding. I prepared a little thing here, which is just, hey, Nuxt Nation 2024 in big. So if we open our application for that real quickly here, I'll also make that a little bit bigger. We have nothing in here. It's pretty minimal. Maybe one less. There we go. So what we have is our app.view. We start with the Nuxt config. That's a bit more convenient. So we have settings so you don't have a light background, right? Just some simple stylings. And yeah, this part I just initted right away. We have the compatibility version set to 4. So all the breaking changes from Nuxt 4 are in already. And we have the compatibility date set. That doesn't matter much. DevTools enabled, and that's it. And we have our app.view. So here we say, okay, cool. Yep, nice. Nuxt Nation 2024. And we have our server, and that's kind of empty. We have we have a TNS config for the server separately, thanks to also the new structure as well. So we make sure, this also has been like that before, but it still helps to say, okay, everything on the server, different auto imports, and so on and so on. And we can just start saying, okay, we create API test.ts here, server's running. And what I usually do is I have a functionality called Nitro Event Handler here, a quick script from the lovely VS Code snippets that I set up. And I can say return, and here we say data, okay. Right? So we can say data, okay, all good, save this. And now we go back to our browser and just say /API/test. And here we see data, okay. And because I'm in Firefox, we also have this nice JSON viewer. There are probably some Chrome plugins for the two. Nevertheless, great. And I just saw it in chat for anyone asking what's that in background. Yeah, 10K subscribers on YouTube. That's why the balloons are around there. Nevertheless, so we have this. We can set up wonderful data in there. We can do a lot of things. But now you might wonder, okay, how do I build a whole API out of that, right? I need like maybe a database connection. I can do various things. What we want to do is maybe take an API that we do on the front end and move it to the back end, then do some stuff. So you can build your own API fully in Nitro, or you can say I have an API that exists already. Maybe, I don't know, a Laravel backend or some general old Java thing. And you would say, okay, you know what, in my script part here, which I quickly create, right, and move that to the top as it's the style right now, and as it makes sense, at least to me, we have something like, oh yeah, we do use fetch, and then we fetch some kind of API, right? We say like, I mean, we can fetch /API/test here. That also works. That's something we can do, but we rather wanna fetch a third-party API. And as third-party API as a good choice would be something like the Icon has dad jokes API. It's a very lovely API that I commonly use for testing these things. So what we can do is we can just say Icon has that joke.api is what we use, or copy that over here. And we say, okay, let's fetch that. We have some data. Well, we can await that if we feel like we wouldn't need to. But in this case, we can just do that and say, okay, let's put it in here. Right? Then we say, nice, we have some headers. We set these application JSON headers because the API asks to, otherwise it will just be a text. And now if we would switch over and go back here and refresh, we would see, oh, that didn't work because we only hit /API. So now we get some HTML gibberish, which doesn't really help. We also need to actually hit the API with the right endpoint. So we can just do this. I think that should be the normal endpoint without anything. And here we go. Great. So now we have the ID, the joke, and so on. And from here, we could start and say, how we do this, how we can move these jokes to the backend, maybe store them somewhere, and also maybe find the last 5, because if that any user requested. Because if I refresh here, very lovely, I get random jokes, right? Like, how does a penguin build its house? It glues it together. Yeah, not bad, not bad. We probably want to save a few of them so that we just know which ones are popular, let's say. And we could even save most of them and cache them and so on and so on. So let's go back here. Wonderful. And well, how do we do this? Well, of course, we have our API part here. And we can say, great, let's just have an API, a joke.ts. Why not? Nitro event handler, Same idea, here we go. And in here, we can just say, yeah, we do fetch the data here, so we could just fetch it on the backend. For that, we don't use a composable, obviously, because, well, view composables in the server part, big no, except use runtime config, which is a little special there, right? So use runtime config works on the servers, on Nitro part, and also on the client side. We can use that, but we don't use any runtime config here. But still, don't try to import Pinia stores in the server part. That's never a good idea. Okay, so that means we go back here and say, okay, $fetch is what we use then. And we fetch icon has dad joke API. We say const response. We await the whole thing, and we can just say we return the response here. Not a problem. Now, let's see how this works in our API. Of course, not test anymore. Now it's, we said joke or jokes. It was joke. Wonderful. So we get these now. Perfect. That's great. So that works pretty nicely. The only thing is we didn't do much, except now we have, let's say, glorified proxy, which just fetches that in Nitro and returns the results. So it doesn't give us any benefits yet. But of course, we can give some. And the easiest way is to say, okay, you know what? We have the response here. Let's let's save all these things, because so what the response consists of is an ID and joke and a status. So of course we can type it nicely if we want to. We say, okay, we have an ID, which is just a string. We have the joke, which is also a string, and a status, which is probably a number. And it's probably redundant, but still. So we have the whole thing. We can say, okay, because we don't have any type definitions, we use a generic to put this in here. And now we can just say, okay, you know what? We know the whole things. So I could just say, okay, I can just return the joke if we want to, like this. And say this is either response.joke. And we can check real quick again how it looks like. And that's exactly the case. So very, very easy rewriting. Now what we could do next, of course, saying, okay, we have the joke. That's great. I can even get it out here. And maybe the idea as well, because maybe you want to cache it, right? Cache it real quick. How can we do this? Well, with one of the wonderful integrations thanks to Nitro, which is in this case the use storage integration for a package called unstorage. So also you can use all of the unJS packages standalone. So if you say, hey, I have a project with, I don't know, Express still and can't migrate all the things over, even though Nitro has and also HP have Express compatibility layers, no problem. Just use unstorage if you need some kind of universal key value storage. In Nitro, this is already integrated, so we can just use it straight away and say, great, we have a storage, so let's say const storage, and we can say use storage, and can just say we could say assets server, which is a server assets. This is a special storage that's defined there already. It's basically like a file system store for server assets. We could move that to a Redis, Cloudflare, KB store, wherever. That's not a problem. And now we could say we have the storage here, and maybe we don't get it, but we say straight away, let's set an item. And we set the item to the current joke with the joke and the ID, right? And then we just return the joke down here, and we're good. So if we do this, we do the request again here, refresh the whole thing. Then let's check the server. Not much happened. We need to await things as well. That's also helpful. And let's try the whole thing again. All right, wonderful. So in assets over here, we have a joke file, and this contains the data. And that's it. Like, we didn't need to do any FS reading. We didn't need to do anything weird. And the best part is, thanks to that API, we can just do it the same way in any kind of storage. You can even do it with some HTTP calls. So like, hey, get to fetch something, right? Post to send some stuff or update some stuff. So even that would work if your HTTP server is set up the right way. And unstorage even provides a way to set up the server. So a lot of good things happening there. Nevertheless, what do we do now? Why we have that. What's next? Well, we have our joke, so we set that, and it will also override. So let's open it again. We have, okay, how do you make a water bath more bouncy? Use spring water. Yeah, great. If we refresh this now, if a child, okay, let's not read that. It's already there, obviously. So that works very quickly. And now we could say, instead of setting the whole thing here with one joke. We could also say we save this as a joke and an ID because we have the ID. That could also work. Let's do this later on and say like we set the current joke, the last, like the most recent ones. We could even say, you know what, let's name it recent jokes and do a bit more of that. So we say const recent jokes, if there are some, right? Let's just get the item. Maybe say const recent jokes key is recent jokes. That's correct. So we get the whole thing here with recent jokes key. And if it's not there, we just say, okay, you know what? Empty array. That's also fine. And we say this would be just a joke, or, well, not really. We just have, you know what? Let's keep it with joke. That's fine. So we get this. And then we say, let's push the whole thing and say status 200. We don't need this, but the type. And that's awesome, because now we can just say like we save the whole thing again, the whole way as we did it, right? We get it, we push it, we save it. One more thing that we want to do is if the length is bigger than 10, for example, we say like, hey, let's remove something there. And because shift obviously removes the first element, everybody knows that all the time. We never look it up. That will work fine. So let's do this, save it, and try it out. So we refresh this a few times and go back. Here we have recent jokes, and here if we beautify this real quick, we have all these jokes in here. Now maybe there's just one more thing to do. We should show these jokes into the recent jokes in the API, right? So also our Nitro handler comes back here, and now I do something that I really don't like: copy paste code, because this is ideally something you put in a util file, because then it starts with like, oh, what's the key, what's the type? So you could just say, hey, server utils joke.ts and put everything in here. So like move your joke code here, because then you can just reuse it wherever you want, and it's on one place, which I would really, really recommend. Nevertheless, in this case, we're lazy and we can just remove the type declaration. I'm very sorry for that, but this is what's happening here. And just return jokes, recent jokes. And what we can do now is, of course, say, hey, recent jokes. We'll check these out, and they're here. Simple, and works. So from here, what we can do is, and we'll do this, we will set up our front end to just fetch a random joke. We show the recent jokes. Whenever the random joke changes, we'll refetch the random jokes as well. And then we're almost good to go. Now we can even say like, hey, let's display them by ID, save them more. But of course, well, time slowly runs out, so let's get going. And for this, well, we have half of it already here, right? We have our fetch for one joke. So let's say this data here is called a random joke. And instead we say random joke. Now we use some nice use fetch things here. And this is in general pretty interesting for every Nuxt user, even if you will never ever use and touch the Nitro part, because what we can do is we have a button here and say next joke, please. And on click, we say we just call the refresh function. And the refresh function doesn't exist yet, so we'll just say a refresh comes from useFetch and say refresh random joke. We'll probably name this nicely so we really make sure that it works. And then we say const data recent jokes. Of course, we want to make sure we await the whole thing, and then we say /API/recent jokes /API/recent-jokes. We're good. We don't need any params. It's fine. Also here we need a refresh function, or actually maybe we don't. Let's have a watch in a second. Also, we want to remove this part up here. Let me remove the bar. That we want to change out to /API/joke, I think. So we can do that. We don't need the headers anymore because this is now done in the backend, and for Nitro we don't need to set any headers. We have a 2-line front end here, more or less. Let's see if that works, and if not, what we need to do to fix it. So we have the joke here, and we can refresh the joke. That works. The recent jokes are not shown yet because we don't show them anymore. So let's say h2 recent jokes, and well, just publish them. Why not? That sounds like a lovely idea. So we have jokes here. They don't work yet. And if we fully refresh the page, then we don't see anything because this call is done on the server side, which is a good point. We could use the Nuxt DevTools now to check out the payloads. This is in the zoomed in version, a bit tricky, of course. Say, okay, what happened. We can even, and that's also really, really cool, have a call against our routes to make sure, okay, what do they actually return? So even in our lovely dev tools, we can say, okay, API recent jokes, let's run that, and we say, okay, we get this back. Very nice. We get jokes back. So we have to use recent jokes, and we get all the things here. Perfect. So we get this. Now the only thing is, what we want is, of course, refresh this when this up here changes. So that doesn't work right now. What we could do, one way of it is, let's say, okay, we could call a watch and say, okay, why not watch the data that comes from the joke, and whenever that changes, we can call in the refresh function. So we can say refresh all jokes or recent jokes. That's better. There we go. And then we say, we could just say watch random joke. And then we say we refresh the recent jokes. We could even say like not do that immediately. That's fine. So if we move back here and say next joke, then we see, yes, that works. They refresh. And the last one here goes in there as it should. Wonderful. Great. But we could even do something else because there's a watch option, right? So we could say watch, and we watch random joke. Remove this code, and ideally, things just works well. Because useFetch has a functionality, also use async data has this functionality to make sure that you can watch things and update the whole request. So like redo the request. And that also works with params and passing computed and so on and so on. All right. I have like roughly 5 minutes left. So I think this is a really good spot to just showcase. There's a lot of things you can do with the Nitro and Nuxt combination. Once again, you have the whole server pod. You can just move straight away into a new project if you want to. As mentioned, you can use different storage integrations and drivers. You can configure that in your Nuxt config or standalone in your Nitro config. And very interestingly, you might wonder, okay, where in that part is H3 coming in? Maybe that's a good point to show, because this define event handler, well, that's actually something. The event here is type of H3 event, right? It's not used, but it's an H3 event. So the event and everything underlying comes from the HTTP framework H3. Also, if you use something like get header, all the helpers to say, hey, I don't know, I want to read a body and everything, we see they are all auto-imported and they all come, luckily, from H3 to make our life a little bit easier. So please also don't start something like event.node. Let's not do this. Like, don't. Ideally, there's a helper or any way to access whatever you want to access. This makes you very reliant on node code and will actually ruin your runtime agnosticity. So let's not do that. All right. I think it's time to go back to the slides because I will update the slides and the project, and you have that on there. But as there's not that much time left, I just want to say a few more words here, because if you are curious for more, actually, right, for more content, then follow along, right? Check out the YouTube channel or the DJU podcast or both. I want to say thank you so much to all the sponsors, of course, also all the YouTube channel members, Twitch subs, and so on, so on. Thank you for your support all the time. And thanks everyone here live or maybe later in the video for your attention. And I hope you learned a thing or two here. Thank you.
Yay! Thank you, Alex. All right. We do have a few questions for you.
Perfect.
Starting with, for developers using Nuxt primarily for front end, what are the hidden gems of Nitro and H3 that can still benefit their applications?
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, the good thing is, even if you just have an SPA, you can still either say, why not using like Nitro as a standalone microservice? If you say like, okay, I only write front end, it can be still beneficial if you have an SPA to run it with a server to do like some requests, to do like things like basic auth. So with Nitro, we still have a lot of benefits there. Or if you say, okay, I have an SPA, I pre-render still certain pages. I want to opt into some of the route rules of Nuxt. You can still do that with Nuxt as an option. So depending on your projects and your needs, there are lots of ways to see how things go. And even just like playing around for, I don't know, a microservice, if that's a thing in your company or project, to build it up, spin it up with, and yeah, take a look at it.
Yay, thank you. All right. What are some of the key trade-offs or performance considerations when enabling server-side functionality with Nitro, especially in production environments?
Mm, I would say let's take a look at it with Nuxt, right? So if you don't build an SPA but have a server, of course, all the server-side rendering complexity is added, all the performance part of it can be really beneficial, actually, and a good thing to say if you have an SPA and you would have to do all the API requests. Let's say you have 3 different services you want to get data from and then merge it together. Then if you have an SPA, you have to do it all in the client. So maybe they get tons of data that you don't even need because you need like a combination and just throwing away a few parts. So doing that on the server is really beneficial. Same for like the backend for frontend pattern that I kind of teased here. That's really helpful by making sure you only send the data really needed. So that's a good thing. In terms of scalability, it's also often a question like, how scalable is the whole thing with Nitro? I actually wrote my thesis and compared the meta frameworks out there, and like the requests per second for especially Nuxt with Nitro on the hood, they were insane compared to the others. So it's really good for production and for scalability.
Thank you. All right. When working with route rules in Nuxt, what are some advanced use cases, common pitfalls you've encountered when configuring SSR and edge caching?
Yeah, so there are a few things. So if you configure your route rules for your Nuxt pages to cache them, make like sure that you're aware that's only the initial request that's cached. So let's say you cache /about, and a user goes to /about, gets the cached content, then internally navigates further, and then comes back, and you maybe have different content because it's refreshed, right? Or you say, okay, the user doesn't start on /about, but comes from the index page to /about. It has to do an API call to get the new API data. And if your API call isn't cached, then there will be a difference between what is the initial page state and the page state when doing client navigation. So that's definitely a pitfall. And I would recommend just caching the API calls in this case.
Fair enough. All right. With Nitro, how do you handle complex scenarios like API rate limiting or a server-side caching in a way that's scalable and doesn't slow down other app parts?
Yeah, I think so. Server-side caching shouldn't slow down any app parts. I think it should actually boost the page speed up, right? And with something called define cached event handler, with more time, we'd get into this as well. But I have a video on all that as well on the channel. You have a way to say, okay, I want to cache a certain request, or I want to cache certain functions in Nitro itself. So not even the whole request if you need to do like authentication and stuff. To make sure these are pretty quickly executed and with SWR, so stale validate in the background. You can even get always cache data, maybe sometimes stale, but it will always be revalidated in the background, which is pretty useful. Rate limiting, that's always a tricky part. And I think very often this should be solved on a higher level, like for the reverse proxy. But I mean, there is Nuxt security, for example, is a module that has a rate limiter included. But I think I personally would solve that on a higher level and not in Nuxt Nitro itself.
Very cool. All right. And what are some patterns you use for integrating server-side authentication with Nitro in a way that feels easy but also keeps things secure and performant?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've heard a lot from Sebastian about Nuxt auth utils, which are also used. They're pretty nice, especially with Nuxt and Nitro together. Otherwise, there is H3 sessions. So we have session support in H3 and thus also in Nitro, which you can use to build like your own setup. Yeah, if you need some code, I think the Nuxt auth utils repo is a really good starting point. And there are also other people for like other meta frameworks that use Nitro under the hood that did some really nice authentication content. So yeah, worth checking that out too.
All right. Last comment or anything to say? This is an ad by me. So, yay, 10K YouTube subscribers. Congratulations.
Thank you
That's
so much.
huge. So, y'all go follow. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Alex. It was great hearing from you again.
Thanks for having me, and yeah, enjoy the rest of Next Nation, folks.
All right, y'all. So before we go into our next talk, let's talk about some View School. If you've been looking to sharpen your View skills, this is the chance. View School's premium content is now 60% off, giving you access to hundreds of hours of expert tutorials for less than what you'd probably spend on a cup of coffee each month. Whether you're just starting out or brushing up on advanced topics, there's something for everyone. So head over to view.school /BF24 and grab this deal while it lasts. And let's take a look. Yay! Black Friday sales are coming. So here again, we can take a look and see master view and the ecosystem, some pieces around it like Vue, Nuxt, Pina, testing and Jest, GraphQL, TypeScript, VTest, Vite, OpenA, Vue use, FormKit, Astro. There's so many here. So definitely go check this out on what you want to be able to do and get those discounts. Go check it out. Now's a great time to do so. And up next, we have Sigrid Huber. Thank you for joining us. Sigrid is a software engineer who specializes in front-end topics and will share her journey on building the Sentry Nuxt SDK. She brings a wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot today. Welcome to the stage, Sigrid.
Hi. Everyone knows the highs and lows of software development. The highs where you feel super confident about the things you do, and the lows where you're not sure anymore where you should start solving the problem. Especially when developing SDKs or libraries, this is the journey you're on most of the time. Or how I like to call it, the roller coaster ride of software development. It's a crazy ride, but it's definitely fun. Building the Sentry Nuxt SDK gave me such a ride. I had to dig into build tooling and bundling. I had to learn a lot about ESM, talk to a lot of different people, and I came to the point where someone was telling me, "You've landed in confusing territory." I cannot cover the whole journey in this talk, but I'll definitely give you some insights on how ESM affects creating SDKs. I'm Sigrid Huema, and I'm working at Sentry, where I'm building the Nuxt SDK, which is also known as the Sentry Nuxt module. And I help maintain the Sentry JavaScript SDKs. And we have a lot of JavaScript-based SDKs. Here you can see an overview of all the SDKs. We currently have 30 SDKs to support all different JavaScript libraries and frameworks. And all those SDKs are a collection of tools for capturing data on a specific platform. So this data are errors, performance data, or traces, for example. And the specific platform is Nuxt in this case. And all this collected data is visible for you in the Sentry dashboard. And this is where you can see the errors that happened in production in a nice overview where you can click into and see more details. And you can see performance data for your web vitals, for example. And you can see all the traces of your application. So how long your request was taking and all that stuff. So the new Sentry Nuxt SDK is implemented as a Nuxt module, as this is the default way of enhancing your Nuxt application with additional features. And there has already been a community-based module for Nuxt version 2, created by Rafal. But Nuxt version 2 reached end of life in June 2024, so people were waiting for Nuxt version 3 support. And yeah, a lot of people were asking for this version, and we at Sentry thought we're gonna start building the Nuxt SDK now. So overall, we need 3 things to build this SDK. First, we're gonna let users pass configuration somehow. Second, we're gonna add monitoring on the client side. And as we have a server as well, we need to add monitoring on the server side. So first, we want to let users pass some configuration. So users can do this in the init function. This can include customization options or integrations. The Sentry SDK is then initialized with all the functionality you want. In a super simple front-end only project, we might only need one single Sentry init call. But let's see what we need for Nuxt. So Nuxt includes Vue and Nitro, which runs H3 under the hood. So we have the client side, which is the browser runtime with Vue, and then we have a server runtime on the server side. And we should also not forget about the build time. During build time, a lot of stuff happens in the background. For example, source maps are generated and plugins for rollup and Vite can be added. It's important not to mix up the configurations for the build time, the server, and the client runtime. That's why a clear distinction between the configurations was made. So there is the build time config that can be added to the Nuxt config TS file. This can include your source map upload options, for example, and other build time related options. And then we have two runtime configs, which are external files as well. It's the Sentry client config with client-side integrations like the replay integration. And then the server config for Sentry, which can include server-side integration, like the Redis integration for your cache. So let's continue with monitoring on the client side now that we set up all this configuration for the user. We now have the client configuration by the user, but then I ask myself how this file can actually be included to the user's Nuxt application. So where do all your Sentry options go, and where is your init function actually called? So in a Nuxt module, you can include different plugins, which are doing things during runtime. In Sentry's case, that's, for example, capturing errors. It's also possible to add a plugin template, which is basically a function you can pass some code to, and it will generate the plugin during build time. This comes in super handy for adding the Sentry client config to the build. So inside the Sentry module, we can see this add plugin template call, and it imports the Sentry client config, and then the actual plugin code is empty. The module itself is adding plugins, but this part is just adding this import. So now we're gonna import the Sentry config from the user, and the Sentry init call is done, and the client side is initialized with Sentry. So that works now, and we can continue with monitoring on the server side. So then I ask myself, how do I do this? Is it the same process? So we already have the module with the client-side plugin, so I might just add the Nitro plugin and also add a plugin template to include the server-side configuration. Well, it turns out it's not that easy. First of all, this function does not exist in Nitro. And we have another requirement, which is the OpenTelemetry compatibility on the server side. Since version 8, all our node-based SDKs are using OpenTelemetry under the hood to collect traces. So OpenTelemetry, it's also known as OTel, is a vendor-neutral open-source observability framework for instrumenting, generating, collecting, and exporting telemetry data such as traces, metrics, and logs. There was just one problem. I had no backend traces, and the SDK could not collect them. So I had to look more into how OpenTelemetry works under the hood. So I found out that OpenTelemetry uses monkey patching to auto-instrument applications. So in case you don't know what monkey patching is it's modifying existing functions or objects during runtime. So imagine having a banana, but it's already grown, so you decide to give it chocolate spots. So we monkey patch the banana, and after that, the banana has some chocolate spots on it. So that's monkey patching. You're changing behavior after something is already defined. So in code, this can look like this. We have Axios, and we get the Axios get function, and we want to change the get function and add some functionality to it. So we're gonna override this function, call the original one, and then add some console log, for example, to it. Or in the case of Sentry or OpenTelemetry, we add some traces to it. So how long this function actually run. So now that we understand what monkey patching is, let's see why it works in some cases, but not in others. It all comes down to how JavaScript loads our code. So module loading in CGS is like reading a book line by line. The CGS loading algorithm goes also through line by line. So at first, we're going to assign this name variable. And then in the second line, we're going to load the module A because of the require call here. Then this whole file is evaluated. In this file, we're going to export the log module function, and then we return to the other file. And here we can log module A because we just defined this function. Because of this line-by-line mode, CGS is also called synchronous. And CGS is monkey patchable. So OTel hooks into the require function and it then monkey patches the modules on the fly. So whenever you require, for example, Axios or a backend library, OpenTelemetry is monkey patching this module on the fly so you can get instrumentation for this module. So how does module loading look like in ESM? You can imagine ESM like a puzzle. So each module is one piece. And ESM, the ESM module loading algorithm is split up in 3 phases. The first phase is the construction phase, which loads and parses the files into a module record. And in the second phase, we instantiate this. We allocate some memory space and link all those files together. And in the last phase, we're going to evaluate everything. So that's executing the code and storing the actual variable values into the allocated memory space. And this is also the reason why ES module loading is called asynchronous, because it happens in those 3 steps. So this is not monkey patchable, but we'll continue on this later. So writing ESM syntax is not the same as running ESM, because usually when you build an application which is using import statements and the ESM syntax, it's usually compiled to CGS. So when you look into the build output, you have require calls. But Nitro is a modern server-side toolkit which uses ESM in the build output. So we have .mgs files in the build output. So yeah, turns out OpenTelemetry currently only has limited support for ES modules. And that's because of monkey patching. That's not possible in ESM, right? So now we don't have monkey patching for ES modules. And how do we use OTel then? I was kind of questioning myself there at this point. So as already mentioned, the module loading algorithm has different phases. And the immutable import bindings are created during the linking phase. So that's the second phase, here where we link all the files. This phase can also be seen like as the puzzle is assembled. So all the modules are in place and you cannot change anything after that anymore. So you cannot change the imports after this happens. So the loading in ESM can still be customized with loader hooks. And this happens in the construction phase, in the first phase, where we load the files and we can hook into how this loading works. And this is kind of like monkey patching. So yeah, let's try this. And this requires the user to do something as well, because the loader hook has to run before the rest of the application. So each user has to add this CLI flag import with the hook has to add this to the node call when you run the server. And this works. So yeah, now we have backend traces, but we have bad developer experience because everyone has to add this import this import CLI flag. So yeah, I was able to find a way to solve this without having users to add the import flag, and that's the import expression, which is also called dynamic import. So the import, the dynamic import imports all the code that should be run after the loader hooks are registered. So what I did is building a rollup plugin that's changing your output a little bit. So the Sentry init call is called before you dynamically import your server. So this ensures the correct order of execution. And what's also maybe good to know as a side note that import is not a function, although it looks like one. So yeah, now we have backend traces, and we also have a nice developer experience. So what's the current state of the application? And what's the current state of the SDK? The SDK is currently in beta, so this means that the APIs won't get breaking changes anymore, but there can be changes in behavior. And yeah, I would be super happy if you test it out and file an issue if any problems occur. So feel free to head to the Sentry docs and set up the SDK. It's really just a few steps and super easy. Thank you, and I'm curious for your questions.
Yay! Thank you, Sigrid.
Hello.
We do have a few questions for you. First one is, this sounds so promising. Curious, does it play well with Cloudflare workers, especially server-side edge?
Currently, it's not 100% supported. We have a Cloudflare SDK that you can also use. You have to create a custom setup currently, also because we are still in beta, as already mentioned. And yeah, I think currently it's best to use the Cloudflare SDK for your worker and the Vue SDK for your front end. But in the future, we will work on that to also make it available inside the Nuxt SDK.
Thank you. All right. What are you using for graph visualization? Are there custom made or using third-party framework?
I was creating the slides with Google Slides, so all those basic visualizations were made in Google Slides, but I also used Figma.
Very cool. Thank you. All right. Does Sentry use OpenTelemetry client-side? How does it keep trace context across promises in browser?
We're only using OpenTelemetry on the server side currently, and maybe it's coming on the client side as well, but it's really experimental still from OpenTelemetry side. Yeah, let's gonna see how this turns out. And we keep the trace context with meta tag in HTML. So when the server is creating the HTML and the Sentry is initialized on the server side, the server creates a trace ID, and this ID is injected into the HTML. And then when the client side Sentry init is called, this is picked up there, and the trace can be continued there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. Up next, we have Benjamin joining us. Benjamin is the author of Nuxt UI. Fun fact, Benjamin is a first-time speaker, so be very, very warm and welcoming to him. He's here to discuss the future of Nuxt UI. Benjamin's work is pushing the boundaries of technology, and we're eager to hear his insights. Welcome to the stage, Benjamin.